There's a line from my book that says, if culture, good or bad, doesn't smack you in the face, then you don't have culture. Let that sit for a second. Because if your team can't feel it, it doesn't exist. I'm Rich Levene, and this is Meet Me at the Gate, where we're not just talking theory, we're tackling real-world problems head-on, driving solutions that supercharge productivity and team dynamics. Every episode is a journey towards improvement, empowering you, the manager, to lead with innovation and confidence. Join us to transform everyday roadblocks into highways for success. Welcome to another episode of Meet Me at the Gate. Today, we're going to talk about a truth that every manager must hear. You're not just managing a team, you are the culture. Culture isn't created through retreats or handbooks. It shows up in your tone of voice. It's revealed when mistakes happen. It's how safe your people feel when they approach you with a problem. We're going to talk about how attitude shapes the tone of your entire operation. More than what you write in an email, type in a Slack, it's how you show up every day that defines your environment. You set the tone, and it matters more than you may just realize. Culture isn't something you post in the break room or point out in an employee handbook. It's not a catchy phrase or a set of values taped to the wall. It's living, breathing experience. It's how people feel when they walk into the room and interact with you. It's whether they feel safe, supported, challenged, and valued, or overlooked, micromanaged, and dismissed. When I wrote the book, You're Doing It Wrong, I reflected on that culture. Everything was measured in cars sold, hours logged, tasks completed. If performance dropped, the people were blamed. The response was more rules and more oversight, which ultimately led to an increased amount of pressure on the team. Instead of creating clarity or accountability, it created tension. People felt scrutinized instead of supported, and that pressure didn't inspire greatness. It discouraged risk-taking and growth. The result wasn't excellence, it was anxiety. People stopped taking initiative. They avoided risk, avoided feedback, and avoided growth. Innovation suffered. People focused on survival instead of contribution. They kept their heads down and just did enough to get by, which is the exact opposite of what a strong culture is supposed to do and what is supposed to inspire. Culture is shaped by your standards. It's formed by what you tolerate, what you acknowledge, and what you uplift. If you let negativity slide, it becomes normal. If you celebrate collaboration, people start supporting one another. It's never neutral. Every action you take or don't take either reinforces your culture or erodes it. I once asked a manager why his team never spoke up. He said, "I don't know. They're quiet." So I asked him, "How do you respond when somebody challenges one of your ideas?" He sat there for a second and said, "Usually I just correct them." Well, there's your answer. If it's not safe to speak up, no one's going to do it. If the only thing that matters is output, people won't tell you the truth when something breaks. They're going to protect themselves, and they're going to lose trust. Here's something I often say. You don't install culture. You live it. You model it. And if you're not doing that consistently, your culture will drift, or worse, it's going to default into something toxic. I once asked a leader, "What happens when you enter the room?" She paused. "I'm not sure," she said. Right there is the issue. Leaders must be aware of how their presence lands, because culture isn't what you say, it's what people experience. It's not enough to roll out new values during an onboarding and expect them to stick. If your values say integrity, but your team sees you as cutting corners, what message do you really think that says? If your values say teamwork, but they hear leaders gossiping behind closed doors, what's really being reinforced? Culture lives in the gap between what you say and what you do, and your team is always watching to see if that gap is wide or non-existent. If you want to know what your culture is, don't read the HR handbook. Listen to how people talk when they think you're not listening. Pay attention to what people joke about, what gets whispered in the hallway, and how they respond when someone makes a mistake. Let me give you a real-world example. I once visited two separate locations within the same company. One had a culture where people were upbeat, supportive, and openly shared all their ideas. The other, it was tense, quiet, and siloed. Same values, same brand, same executive team, but two completely different cultures. Why? Because at one location, the leader practiced open door communication. They gave credit publicly, provided feedback privately, and showed genuine interest in their employees' lives. At the other end, the leader led through intimidation, rarely walked the floor, and only showed up when something went wrong. Culture starts at the top, but it shows up everywhere. It's in how your team handles pressure. Do they support each other or do they isolate? It's in how people respond to feedback. Are they defensive or are they receptive? It's in the tone of your team meetings. Are people engaged or just counting down the minutes to get out of the room? When you lead with trust, hope, humility, and empathy, you create a place that people want to work. Not because it's easy, but because it's meaningful, because it's grounded, because it's consistent. And when people feel safe, they speak up. They take initiative. They go above and beyond, not because they have to, but because they want to. And you can't fake that. You have to live it. And that's why culture and leadership are not separate conversations. They're one and the same. Every Friday, ask yourself, if my team mirrored my behavior this week, what kind of place would it be? Would it be focused, optimistic, and open? Or would it be stressed, defensive, and quiet? This isn't a guilt trip for you. It's about calibration. It's about recognizing the influence your daily habits have on others. Whether you're conscious of them or not, the tone you set, even in passing moments, becomes the default setting for your team. Think about this. If you walked in every morning distracted and overwhelmed, your team picks up on that energy. They mirror it. If you were short with people, skipped greetings, and seemed inaccessible, they internalize that and adjust their behavior. They speak up less. They ask fewer questions. They assume now that it's not a good time. But if you made time to listen, if you coach through a mistake instead of punishing it, if you pause to praise someone's progress, even briefly, those moments matter. They add up. They tell your team, this is a place where people matter. When I arrived at my last job, the culture wasn't good. People hesitated. It wasn't because they didn't care. It was because they didn't feel safe enough to show up fully. There was no punishment, but there was also no real encouragement. So I had to shift the focus, not just for others, but for myself. I started showing up on the lot more. I stayed curious. I walked slowly. I asked more questions. And I gave people space to speak. I made fewer assumptions and took more time to understand before responding. And guess what happened? People opened up. They brought ideas. They took responsibility. And that sense of ownership became contagious. This is a powerful leadership presence. When you model consistency, vulnerability, and clarity, people start to reflect those same behaviors back. A lot of listeners tell me, Rich, this is great stuff, but I'm not the general manager. I'm not setting the budgets or calling the shots. And I get that. Most of us lead from the middle. But here's what you need to understand. Middle managers have enormous influence, not just on their teams, but on their leaders as well. Leading up isn't about confrontation or rebellion. It's about modeling what's possible. If your tone is steady, your work is reliable, and your feedback is constructive, you create a ripple effect. One of my favorite examples came from a sales manager who I worked with, who was frustrated with senior leadership's lack of clarity. Instead of complaining, she started sending weekly email to her boss with 3 bullet points. 1 win, 1 challenge, and 1 suggestion. No fluff, no complaints, just clarity. Within weeks, other managers started doing the same thing. The VP eventually adapted that format in the team meetings. That's how you lead up, with clarity, with consistency, with initiative. You could also influence by asking better questions. Don't just say, we need more help. Say, here's where we're stuck, here's what we've tried, and here's an option I'd like your thoughts on. That approach shows respect, not resistance. Your leaders are human. They're not always tuned in. But when I see you live in the values, when they say your team is thriving, they pay attention. And that opens doors for bigger and better conversations. Culture just doesn't float downward. It moves in every direction. And sometimes the most impactful changes start with the people who don't have the titles, but do have the courage to lead anyway. So how do you begin building a better culture, especially if you're not at the top? Start with the basics, simple actions done consistently. Shift energy and change environments. Say good morning, not because it's polite, but because it's powerful. A simple greeting says, I see you. It's about presence, not formality. And if someone's having a hard day, your acknowledgement might be the one thing that just keeps them to hold it together. Take responsibility. Nothing builds trust faster than a leader who says, that was my mistake. It's not a weakness. It's leadership in its rawest form. When your team sees that you own your part, they feel safer owning theirs. And over time, that creates a culture of transparency. Recognize effort. Too often we wait for the results before giving feedback, but growth happens in the process, not just the outcome. When someone stretches themselves, whether it works or not, acknowledge it. That moment tells them, we value initiative, and they'll try again. Reinforce values daily. Culture isn't built in meetings, it's built in moments. When somebody handles a customer complaint with integrity, call it out. When someone helps a teammate without being asked, celebrate it. Don't just let good behavior pass unnoticed. Shine a light on it. And here's the biggest thing. Be patient. Culture doesn't change overnight, but it does change slowly, steadily, and permanently if you stay consistent. You don't need a memo or an email or a program to start. You just need to decide who you're going to be every day, because how you lead each day is how your culture takes shape. Let's bring this episode home with a challenge, not a checklist, not another leadership theory, but a call to practice, a call to action. Because reflection without action doesn't create change, and culture doesn't improve just because we want it to. It improves when we lead it intentionally. At the end of this week, or even right after this episode, I want you to find 5 quiet minutes. Step away from your desk, put your phone on silent, open a notebook or your note-taking app, and answer 3 questions that could change how you lead forever. Number 1, when did I lead this week in a way that aligned with the culture I want to create? Number 2, what's one moment or decision I regret, something I would handle differently with what I now know? Number 3, what's one specific thing I can do on Monday to lead with more intention, more clarity, and more connection? These questions are simple, but they're not easy. They challenge your self-awareness. They force you to pause and assess, not just what you did, but who you are. And here's the truth. Your team doesn't need a flawless boss. They need a present one, someone who's aware, someone who's consistent, someone who lives the values they talk about. Your culture is not defined by a single moment. It's defined by your habits, your presence, your reaction to pressure, your willingness to listen, your courage to lead even when it's difficult. It's not in the handbook, and it's not in the corporate initiative. It's not something HR owns. It's you. So let's stop waiting for somebody else to fix the culture. Let's stop hoping someone higher up will lead the change. You go first. You model the culture. You set the tone. Because if culture doesn't smack you in the face, it doesn't feel real, lived, and experienced, then it's really not culture. And that means it's your move. Thanks for spending time with me on Meet Me at the Gate. If this episode gave you something to think about, something to try, please share with another manager who's ready to lead better. And don't forget to follow the show on Spotify or YouTube so you never miss another episode. If you're on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'd love to hear how you're shaping culture where you're at. Until next time, remember, leadership isn't a title, it's a tone. And that tone starts with you. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Meet Me at the Gate. I hope the conversation has helped to fuel your drive and equip you with insights to steer your team towards success. Remember, the road to success is always under construction. And until next time, keep your engines revving and your gas tanks full.